Nestled in the heart of suburbia, the neighborhood emerged like a well-crafted postcard, a picture of tranquility defined by pastel-colored homes, neatly trimmed hedges, and perfectly aligned picket fences. Each yard seemed to bloom with color, vibrant flower beds spilling onto manicured lawns. It was a place where Sunday barbecues and children's laughter filled the air. The sun cast a warm, golden hue over the scene, reflecting off the gleaming cars parked in driveways and illuminating the path for residents taking their evening strolls. Yet, beneath this serene facade, tension brewed like an approaching storm. A faint murmur arose as neighbors gathered on their porches and in front yards, drawn by the escalating commotion near the end of the cul-de-sac. The sound of a woman's voice pierced through the idyllic sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. It was sharp, demanding attention. In stark contrast to the picturesque surroundings stood the furious middle-aged woman known to locals as HOA Karen. With her fists clenched tightly around a broken wheelchair charger, she radiated fury as she stood on the driveway with fiery eyes locked onto her target, the young woman in the wheelchair. The atmosphere thickened with disbelief as passers-by paused mid-conversation, their previous lightheartedness replaced by an unsettling curiosity. The young woman, seated in her wheelchair, appeared stricken. Her wide eyes betrayed shock and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability in the face of Karen's uncontrollable outburst. Beside her, a man clad in a tailored suit held legal documents close to his chest, his stance confident yet ready to defend. With a determined glare, he faced Karen with an unwavering intensity that suggested he would not back down. Neighbors leaned closer, their whispers mingling with apprehension. Some exchanged concerned glances while others squeezed out exasperated breaths. They awaited resolution but sensed that this confrontation was only just beginning. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows that mirrored both the gravity of the moment and hints of justice rising within this seemingly perfect neighborhood. Karen stood at the edge of the driveway, a formidable figure embodying fury. Her typically composed demeanor had disintegrated, replaced by a flush of anger that contorted her features. The tight grip she maintained on the broken wheelchair charger spoke volumes about her emotional state. The crumpled plastic seemed to echo her growing wrath as she brandished it like a badge of rebellion. Each time she shouted, her voice cut through the air, sharp, accusatory, demanding an audience. "Do you have any idea how this affects the neighborhood?" Karen roared, her voice laced with indignation. The words rolled off her tongue like venom, directed squarely at the young woman in the wheelchair. With every shout, it became clear that this confrontation was more than just an issue over a broken charger. It was an eruption of deeper frustrations tied to her self-imposed guardianship of community standards. In the foreground, the young woman sat motionless, shock evident in her wide eyes. She was caught off guard, feeling small and vulnerable. Under Karen's seething scrutiny, the accusatory tones washed over her like cold water, freezing her ability to respond, while Karen continued to hurl baseless claims. "You're just a nuisance. And this is why we can't have nice things," echoed through the gathering crowd. As the neighbors looked on, divided expressions painted on their faces. They felt a knot tighten in their stomachs. Some exchanged glances filled with concern for the young woman who was unwillingly entangled in this ferocious outburst. Others appeared sympathetic to Karen's self-righteous fury, a reflection of their own fears regarding community reputation and order. Beside the young woman stood the man in the suit, his steady gaze locked onto Karen with unwavering resolve. He seemed to absorb every word she spat out, while calculating his next move in this volatile scene. He wielded legal documents as both armor and weapon. It became increasingly clear that he would not allow this moment of chaos to persist unchallenged. The stage had been set for a confrontation that would ripple through their seemingly tranquil neighborhood, igniting tensions that had long been stifled. As the chaos unfolded around her, the young woman in the wheelchair felt a wave of shock wash over her, rendering her temporarily frozen in place. Her wide eyes reflected confusion and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, amplifying her physical limitations in stark contrast to Karen's aggressive stance. She sat there, a fragile figure encased in metal and fabric, feeling entirely exposed under the harsh glare of accusations being hurled at her with reckless abandon. The noise of Karen's voice faded into the background as the young woman grappled with her emotions, fear, disbelief, and a deep-seated humiliation that tightened like a vice around her chest. Each shout from Karen felt like a blow, reverberating through her mind. "You're just a nuisance," rang out, reminding her of her struggles and the difficult reality she faced, both physically and socially. The weight of these words anchored her in place. She wanted to respond, to fight back against this tide of hostility, yet she felt trapped within her own body. In that moment, all the empowerment she had fought for seemed to slip away. Her hands gripped the armrests tightly, knuckles turning white as she processed the confrontation unfolding before her. She sensed the eyes of neighbors upon her, some sympathetic, others critical, and it intensified her feelings of despair. Was she really a nuisance? Did they see her as a burden? The questions were like shrapnel stabbing at her heart. Beside her, the man in the suit stood as an anchor amid the turmoil. His unwavering glare focused on Karen signaled a resolve that she desperately needed but could not muster herself. She glanced toward him, feeling both reassured and vulnerable. His presence was a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight, yet it also highlighted how outmatched she felt against the storm of accusations. As Karen continued to unleash her fury, the young woman could only sit there, shocked and overwhelmed, hoping desperately for someone to intervene and restore some semblance of order to the chaos that threatened to consume not only their conversation but also her dignity. The atmosphere crackled with tension as emotions swirled around them like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind, leaving her feeling more powerless than ever in this suburban battleground. As the confrontation intensified, the man in the suit shifted his stance, embodying a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with Karen's bluster. He stood protectively beside the young woman, exuding an air of authority that drew the attention of onlookers, many of whom felt a flicker of hope at his presence. His tailored jacket hugged his shoulders, and he held a folder of legal documents tightly. The papers slightly crinkled from his firm grip, an indication that he was ready to act. His eyes were focused, piercing through the chaos with a calm intensity. There was no hint of hesitation in his demeanor. Instead, he radiated a sense of purpose as he prepared to confront Karen's aggression. The sharp lines of his suit contrasted with the emotional turmoil surrounding them, making him appear almost like a beacon amid the confusion. He knew that words could be weapons. They could either inflame or diffuse tension, and he was determined to wield them wisely. As Karen continued her barrage of accusations, he took a step closer to the young woman in the wheelchair, subtly positioning himself between her and her aggressor. This gesture was not just physical protection but an emotional shield as well. The man's presence seemed to imbue her with a sense of safety. She glanced up at him and found reassurance in his unwavering gaze. His expression conveyed not just support but also resolve, a promise that she would not have to face this storm alone. The legal documents he clutched served as more than mere paperwork. They symbolized preparation for battle against unfairness or oppression. Each word on those pages represented rights and protections that were hers by law. As he scanned Karen's agitated figure, it became clear he was assessing not just her words, but also the implications behind them. The potential for legal repercussions if she crossed lines into harassment or defamation. The atmosphere was thick with tension as neighbors held their breath, waiting for this poised man to speak. With each moment passing, it felt as though justice itself hung in the balance, ready to tip based on whatever came next. As Karen's voice droned on with indignation, they sensed that this man would soon take action, not merely for himself or even for her, but for fairness that echoed throughout their community's fragile harmony. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, neighbors began to cluster around the scene, drawn by the escalating drama. Their expressions mirrored a spectrum of emotions: disbelief, concern, and a rising tension that seemed to electrify the air. Some stood frozen, arms crossed defensively, while others leaned in closely, straining to catch every word exchanged between Karen and the young woman in the wheelchair. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, punctuated by soft gasps or exclamations of shock, each reaction amplifying the charged atmosphere. At the edge of the gathering, an elderly woman clutched her gardening gloves tightly in one hand, her face a mask of worry as she quietly voiced her concerns to a neighbor. A young couple exchanged glances that revealed their own unease. They were unsure whether to intervene or remain passive observers. As children peeked from behind their parents' legs, their innocent faces reflected confusion at the adult conflict unfolding before them, a stark contrast to their usual carefree play. As Karen's Voice grew louder with each accusation. Some onlookers began to shift uncomfortably, caught between sympathy for the young woman and an unsettling admiration for Karen's fierce determination. They whispered among themselves about community values and what it meant to uphold standards, questioning whether this confrontation was an overstep of authority or a necessary defense of the neighborhood's reputation. The man in the suit shifted slightly. Casting a glance at the gathering crowd, it was clear. He noticed how invested everyone was in this moment. Their very attention signaled an expectation for resolution, as if justice itself had come to bear witness. He felt their gazes weighing down upon him, yet sensed their collective hope. They wanted not only fairness but also reassurance that decency and respect would prevail in their community. With emotions running high and every eye fixed on him and his stance beside the vulnerable young woman, he understood that whatever he said next could change the course of this chaotic afternoon. This was not merely a dispute over a broken charger. It was about empowerment and compassion within their suburban haven where, until now, peace had seemingly reigned supreme. The tension thickened like fog rolling into the valley, an uncertain moment poised on the brink of resolution or further upheaval. As the tension mounted around the confrontation, flashes of Karen's recent past flickered through her mind, revealing the roots of her fury. It was only a week prior that she had attended a vigorous homeowners association meeting, where heated debates raged about new restrictions on property modifications. The proposals had ignited a storm of discontent among residents, particularly regarding accessibility features for homes, an issue that deeply resonated with the community given its growing diversity. Karen had been adamant in her opposition to these changes, feeling it was her duty to uphold the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. As a self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, she viewed any adjustments as threats to the carefully curated image they all presented. "We must maintain our property values," she had declared passionately at the meeting. But few seemed to share her fervor or concern. Then came the final straw. News that some homeowners had begun installing ramps and wider doorways to accommodate mobility needs. Actions Karen perceived as not just alterations but as flagrant breaches of their neighborhood's policies. She felt betrayed by her neighbors, whom she believed should align with her vision of order and uniformity in their idyllic suburban enclave. In her eyes, these changes represented chaos seeping into their structured lives. With each word spewed forth during this fateful encounter in front of the young woman in the wheelchair, Karen's emotions boiled over as if they were a dam breaking under pressure. Her anger was not merely about the charger. It symbolized all she thought was wrong with people flouting rules and disregarding tradition. Each shout echoed the fears and frustrations that had festered within her since that meeting, a mounting dread that their community would no longer resemble the place she so dearly cherished. Caught up in this mix of frustration and indignation, Karen's accusations became less about accountability and more about her need for control, a desperate grasp at maintaining order amid what felt like an unraveling thread in her suburban tapestry. This confrontation became not just about a broken charger. For Karen, it was a battle for preserving what she believed to be their very way of life against an encroaching tide of change she could neither understand nor accept. As the tension swirled around them, the man in the suit took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to engage Karen on her own terms. "You need to calm down and consider what you're saying," he said firmly, his voice steady but laced with authority. "This isn't just about property standards. There are real people affected by your words." Karen, her face flushed with indignation, responded sharply, "I'm trying to protect our community's values. This is what keeps our neighborhood desirable." She waved the broken charger in front of him as if it were evidence of a greater crime against their way of life. People can't just come in and change everything without considering how it impacts everyone else. The man's expression hardened as he replied, "Respecting accessibility isn't a threat. It's an obligation we have to one another as neighbors. What's more important, the appearance of your home or the dignity of every resident who lives here?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, prompting murmurs from the crowd that had assembled around them. Karen huffed in frustration. "You're missing the point. It's not just about dignity. It's about maintaining order. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this place will fall apart." Her defensive entitlement echoed through her voice, a desperate clinging to an ideal that was now slipping through her fingers. He countered calmly. "Order doesn't mean denying others their rights. You're entitled to your opinions, but they shouldn't come at someone else's expense." He gestured toward the young woman beside him, whose vulnerability was palpable. "Can't you see how misguided this all is? You talk about order when you're disregarding basic humanity." The assertive sense of justice he embodied radiated from him as he stood resolutely next to the young woman. For a moment, their opposing viewpoints collided, a self-righteous fervor against a principled stand for equality and compassion. The crowd watched attentively, entranced by this clash of ideals unfolding before their eyes. As Karen opened her mouth to respond again, perhaps caught between anger and realization, it became clear that this was more than a dispute over a wheelchair charger. It was a battle for community values at its core, a struggle between entitlement and justice that would resonate long after this moment faded into memory. As the confrontation escalated, Karen's composure began to unravel. The broken wheelchair charger felt like an extension of her anger, and she brandished it with increasing fervor, as if it were a weapon meant to pierce through the resolve of those who opposed her. "You don't understand what you're doing to this neighborhood," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch and intensity. "If this keeps up, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of disturbances you bring here." The onlookers shifted uneasily, caught between shock and intrigue at her escalating emotions. Karen's words became increasingly unhinged, her face contorting with indignation. "You think I'm just going to sit back and let you ruin everything we've built? You'll regret this." Her threats echoed through the air, charged with a desperation that hinted at her deeper fears of losing control over a world she believed she was meant to protect. The man in the suit stood firm beside the young woman, his expression darkening as he took in Karen's behavior. He sensed that her fury was no longer solely about the broken charger. It encapsulated everything she felt was slipping away from her grasp: order, community standards, and the very essence of their neighborhoods. "Identity. Karen," he said firmly but calmly, attempting to diffuse the situation, "this isn't how you handle things. Threatening people won't solve anything." Karen's eyes narrowed at him, disbelief etched across her features. "And what do you know about handling things? You come in here with your fancy suit and legal jargon, thinking you can dictate how we live." She spat back, gripping the charger tighter until her knuckles turned white. The tension in the air was palpable. Neighbors held their breath as they watched this confrontation unfold. "Do you really think this is going to intimidate me?" he pressed on, unwavering. "What you're doing is only making this worse for yourself." With every threat Karen unleashed, it became clear that she was not only fighting against the young woman but also against an evolving community that challenged her views. Her unhinged accusations swirled around them like a storm cloud ready to burst. A stark reminder that this encounter was about far more than a broken wheelchair charger. It was a battle for the heart of their neighborhood itself. As Karen's fury intensified, so too did the stakes for everyone involved, leaving the crowd anxious for resolution amidst an atmosphere thick with unresolved conflict and palpable tension. Just as the confrontation reached its boiling point, a voice broke through the tension, a neighbor named Samantha, known for her outspoken nature and community spirit. She stepped forward from the crowd, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Karen, wait. Let's take a breath here," she urged, her tone measured but firm. The crowd shifted to make way for her as she positioned herself between Karen and the young woman, determined to add a layer of reason to the escalating chaos. "Everyone knows you care about this neighborhood," Samantha continued, looking directly at Karen. "But what you're doing right now isn't helping anyone. You can't just go around threatening people because they don't share your views." Her words resonated with many in the crowd, prompting murmurs of agreement. Karen's eyes darted between Samantha and the man in the suit, frustration boiling beneath her exterior. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me. It's about protecting our way of life," she exclaimed, brandishing the broken charger anew as if it were an argument itself. Samantha took a step closer, her voice never wavering. "I get that you're scared of change, but we can't ignore those who need support. That we should be lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down." Her calm approach contrasted sharply with Karen's frantic demeanor. It was a reminder that community meant embracing diversity and understanding one another regardless of differing perspectives. As Samantha spoke, the crowd began to listen more intently. They could see that this confrontation was evolving into a dialogue, not just between Karen and the man in the suit, but among all present. Some neighbors nodded while others frowned, reflecting their own conflicting feelings about community values and individual rights. The man in the suit sensed this shift and interjected gently. "What we need is a conversation, not threats or ultimatums. Let's find common ground before this escalates further." With Samantha standing firmly beside him, it became clear that change was possible through understanding rather than conflict. The atmosphere lightened slightly as some tension dissipated. Perhaps this moment could be transformed from one of hostility into a catalyst for meaningful dialogue within their community. In that instant, it was not just about defending positions, but about recognizing their shared humanity. A glimmer of hope for resolution flickered amid the stormy emotions surrounding them. Amidst the rising tension and heated exchanges, the young woman in the wheelchair felt a surge of emotion welling up inside her. For too long, she had listened silently to Karen's tirade, absorbing insults and threats that chipped away at her dignity. But as she looked around at the gathered neighbors, all eyes fixed on this chaotic tableau, something shifted within her. She realized that this was not just about herself. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or disrespected. Drawing a deep breath, she found her voice and spoke up, cutting through Karen's barrage of accusations. "Actually, you don't understand what you're doing to this neighborhood, either," she said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength of her words. "You think that by protecting your idea of order, you're supporting our community, but all you're doing is instilling fear in those who need compassion and understanding." The crowd fell silent, their attention rapidly shifting from Karen to the young woman whose powerful stance overshadowed her physical vulnerability. She continued, emboldened by their focus. "People like me deserve to belong here just as much as anyone else that I may need help in life. But that doesn't make me a nuisance or a burden. I have value and contributions to make." Her voice resonated with a determination that cut through the air like a beacon. Karen's expression soured further as her grip tightened on the broken charger. She glared at the young woman incredulously. "You don't know what it takes to keep this place running smoothly," she shot back defensively. "Maybe I don't," the young woman replied swiftly, her heart racing yet steady. "But I know that community isn't about rules or appearances. It's about lifting each other up." The man in the suit looked on with pride as he recognized the shift in narrative. This was no longer only about defending against Karen's attacks. It was now an affirmation of empowerment. The crowd began to murmur in agreement as they witnessed this courageous stand unfold before them. But as Karen continued to sputter objections, it became evident that her tactics were failing against this newfound wave of solidarity sparked by one brave voice. The balance of power shifted dramatically in that moment. What had begun as chaos now held a glimmer of hope for change, a reminder that true community spirit thrives on empathy rather than entitlement. As the confrontation reached a critical juncture, the man in the suit stepped forward, drawing on his legal knowledge to address the escalating situation. That he cleared his throat and spoke firmly, ensuring everyone could hear him over the rising tension. "Karen," he began, his voice steady and authoritative, "I want you to understand the potential legal implications of your actions right now." The crowd quieted, their attention shifting towards him as if he were a lighthouse guiding them through the storm. "What you're doing, threatening another resident and brandishing that charger as though it were a weapon, can be classified as harassment. Not only could you face community backlash, but there could also be legal consequences," he stated, each word carefully chosen to emphasize the gravity of the matter. Karen's face twisted in irritation, yet she remained silent, which allowed him to continue. "Furthermore, by publicly shaming someone who is already vulnerable, you risk violating anti-discrimination laws. This young woman deserves respect and dignity, just like every other member of this community." His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to Karen's volatile anger, making his message all the more compelling. He gestured toward the young woman beside him, who sat slightly taller now, emboldened by his support. "Your insistence on maintaining an ideal of order at the expense of compassion only serves to fracture our community. We're all here to support one another, and that includes recognizing the needs of those who may require accommodations." The crowd began to murmur again, this time with a sense of understanding. Neighbors exchanged glances filled with renewed hope as they processed the man's words. Karen's grip on the broken charger faltered as she considered the ramifications of her behavior in light of these legal implications. "Think about what kind of community we want to be," he urged, his voice imbued with passion. "One built on fear and exclusion, or one that embraces all its members? Choosing the latter means standing up for each other, not tearing each other down." With a momentary flicker of vulnerability surfacing in Karen's eyes, it became clear that this was no longer solely about her anger. It was a defining moment for their community, a chance for collective growth or further division. The tension in the air shifted palpably as they stood on the precipice of change. With justice hanging in the balance and the potential for true understanding emerging from the chaos, the man in the suit concluded his powerful address. A contemplative silence enveloped the crowd. The onlookers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from shock to reflection as they began to process the implications of the confrontation. The atmosphere crackled with an undercurrent of introspection, prompting many to question their own beliefs about community and belonging. One neighbor, a middle-aged man known for his conservative views on property management, stepped forward hesitantly. "You know," he began, his voice almost a whisper, "I've always thought that keeping things in line was the best way to protect our neighborhood. But maybe I've been looking at it all wrong." His admission seemed to resonate, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another neighbor, a mother with children in tow, added her thoughts. "I've been so focused on rules and regulations that I didn't really see how they might hurt others. We should be supporting each other, not tearing each other down." Her words struck a chord. Others nodded and began vocalizing similar sentiments, a collective realization dawning among them that community should be about connection, not exclusion. Karen stood frozen, the broken charger still clutched tightly in her hand as she absorbed the impact of their reflections. That it was becoming increasingly evident that her passionate defense of community standards had inadvertently alienated the very neighbors she sought to protect. The mounting realization among the attendees formed a wave of solidarity that began to drown out the discordant notes of fear and entitlement. "Perhaps we need to rethink what it means to be a community," another voice chided gently from further back in the crowd. "Maybe it's time to elevate compassion above compliance." Encouraged by this shift in public opinion, the young woman in the wheelchair felt her heart swell with hope. Each supportive comment from her neighbors was a confirmation that she was not alone in this fight. As they began to unite in solidarity, she knew they were capable of creating real change. Karen's grip faltered. The crowd's acknowledgement of their shared responsibility hung in the air like an unspoken agreement. It was time to move past rigid rules and celebrate the diversity that made their neighborhood vibrant. With this moment of reflection sparking transformative thoughts among them, the tension from earlier started to dissipate, replaced by a collective desire for understanding and collaboration. Moving forward, the tension in the air began to shift toward understanding. Karen stood amidst the crowd, her grip on the broken charger weakening. The supportive murmurs from her neighbors washed over her like a wave, yet she felt increasingly isolated. The realization that her passionate defense of community standards had led to her alienation weighed heavily on her. Looking around, she could see the faces of her neighbors transforming. Recognition and empathy were replacing fear and compliance. The man in the suit, who had once been merely an observer in a tailored jacket, now appeared as a leader advocating for change. His presence seemed to inspire courage in others, igniting conversations about compassion and support. "Maybe I've been too rigid," Karen muttered under her breath, though it was unclear if anyone heard her, still clutching onto her beliefs tightly. She sensed that the winds of sentiment had shifted irreversibly against her. Samantha moved closer to the young woman in the wheelchair. She extended a hand, offering both friendship and solidarity. "We're all here for each other," she said softly but firmly, signaling an invitation for Karen to join this newfound unity rather than remain entrenched in anger and mistrust. With each passing moment, Karen's resolve crumbled further. She glanced at the young woman, who had bravely spoken up, and saw not an adversary but someone deserving of respect and dignity. The voices of support from around her echoed in her mind. "This is about empathy," they said without words. Realizing that holding on to hostility would only deepen the divides within their community, Karen took a hesitant step back. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she finally admitted, her voice shaky but genuine. "I just wanted to keep things orderly." The crowd responded not with judgment, but with understanding. As they witnessed this moment of vulnerability from Karen, they began to approach her, not as opponents, but as fellow residents willing to engage in dialogue. In that pivotal instant, something remarkable happened. The community embraced their differences instead of allowing them to drive wedges between them. With renewed determination to foster inclusivity and support one another, they signaled a powerful shift toward unity. This confrontation had transformed into an opportunity for healing, one where everyone could contribute to building a vibrant community together. Together, they stepped forward into a future defined by compassion rather than conflict. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with the echoes of the confrontation, the young woman in the wheelchair felt a profound sense of empowerment wash over her. For too long, she had remained silent in the shadows, allowing others to define her experience. Today, however, she had found her voice and stood solidly against unjust treatment, a breakthrough that surged within her like a warm light. She looked around at her neighbors, many who now approached her with smiles and words of support. This gesture of unity reminded her that she was part of a larger community that valued understanding and compassion over rigid adherence to rules. It was liberating to realize she wasn't alone. Rather, she was supported by those willing to advocate for what was right. In reflection, she recognized that standing up for herself was not just a personal victory but also a necessary act to uplift others who might feel marginalized or unseen. Today taught me something monumental, she thought as she gazed back toward where Karen had stood in defiance, now just a figure receding into the background of this transformative moment. Empowerment comes from facing injustice head-on, despite fear. With each encounter now filled with encouragement instead of trepidation, the young woman resolved to be an ally for others who struggled with feelings of deficiency or doubt within their own lives. Her newfound bravery had sparked more than just change for herself. It opened doors for conversations previously left unspoken among neighbors, conversations about acceptance, empathy, and the collective responsibility they all shared in fostering inclusivity. No longer would she allow fear or anger to dictate her place within this community. Instead, she would embrace her vulnerability as strength. Her experiences would inspire others to challenge unfair treatment not with hostility, but with love and solidarity. A beautiful response to negativity that could only lead to growth. As groups began forming once more, this time centered around shared vision rather than division, the young woman's heart swelled with hope. The neighborhood's resilience blossomed as it embraced a future defined by connection and mutual support. Empowering one another became synonymous with their identity as a community, and perhaps above all else, this was a moment of awakening. One where bravery would signify not merely standing tall but also lifting others alongside her in harmony.